but you're minimizing the depth of the suffering. And I often put it in this context: if a person walked in and they had a gash in their arm and bleeding, and they sat down and they said, my wife and I are not getting along very well, and I'd really like to get your counseling, and the blood is just running out of their arm. No pastor would say, well, hey, let's talk about you and your wife. No, they say, you have another issue going on. Let's take care of that first, and then we'll talk about that. And those are both ministries. There's nothing wrong with that. So let's deal with the mental health problems causing the issues that come in for first.
Stanford, you are back for another interview. I'm so thankful to have you. This book, Madness and Grace, is remarkable. And what a better time than right now to address mental health challenges and how the church can really step into that. You started writing this way before the pandemic. Tell us how that process went for you.
Yeah, actually, it was October, November of 2019 when Templeton asked me if I'd put together a very practical guide. Pastoral care and serious wellness. So I was writing this when the pandemic hit. And so it was kind of interesting to watch that process. And when I think the pandemic, obviously the pandemic generated a lot of additional mental health problems. And we're seeing that here at our clinic as well and in churches around the country. But I think what the pandemic has done is it really brought mental health home for everybody because of the isolation and separation. And so now I think really everybody is very open to a discussion of mental health issues because they themselves have had to struggle with fear and anxiety and isolation. And at some level, they at least can now kind of associate themselves with what it is to struggle with mental health issues on a daily basis.
Well, the isolation alone has been so challenging. In fact, I was just listening to something this morning by Max Lucado, and he said that calls to emergency centers in the last year have gone up over 800%. Divorces have gone up 26% or more. And depression and anxiety is just becoming more of a household word that people are desperate now for help. And as I'd love to say, problems come up and it's the situation, it doesn't make or break us, it reveals us. And we're seeing a revelation in spades of our need as individuals to connect with our souls and our minds. And what does that look like? One of the things I found interesting, Matt, was that Barna did a research thing in 2021 saying 3/4 of non-practicing Christians say that they would be interested in churches if they offered preaching and programs for mental health. Over 2 in 5 U.S. adults say that counseling is something now that their community needs more than ever. And 55% of people in the community, obviously, this is crazy, are more likely to gossip about suicide than help out a family. But we're seeing that change because of this pandemic. Can you talk into that and what you're experiencing at the Hope and Healing Center in Houston?
No, absolutely. I think that, churches really on one sense, what happened was they kind of got weird way got caught in the pants down with the pandemic because they suddenly realized we're not going to be able to deliver any of our ministry because we've set all of our ministry up for people to come to us to get the ministry. Now they're out there and they're suffering and they're struggling and we can't get to them. We were helping churches literally try to figure out how to set a Zoom call up so they could do a pastoral care. It was sad to see at first, but then to see the momentum, I see now that, churches are really stepping up and saying, hey, you know what, let's go meet people where they are. And people are struggling in their homes. And the idea of depression and anxiety, this isn't some kind of a spiritual weakness or a lack of faith. This is just day-to-day life inside of a global pandemic. And what it is to be isolated. How can we speak into that? How can we help people deal with that? And really, our children are the ones who have suffered the greatest. You mentioned some of that data. There's a study that came out of the University of Michigan Children's Hospital a couple of months ago. This is a national survey. 50% of the parents of teens reported that their teen had a worsening or new mental health problem as a result of the pandemic. 50%. And it was much worse in girls than in boys, although bad in boys, but it's primarily depression, anxiety, a lot of increase in self-harm. So, we can't ignore this anymore. I mean, as you said, with the suicide gossiping data there, that's really very much an us and them kind of thing.
Yeah.
They had suicidal thoughts. They was a suicide victim. That would never happen to me. There almost isn't a person in the world right now that can't say they weren't impacted in a mental health way by this pandemic. And so now it's not us and them anymore, it's us. And it's a great opportunity for the church to step up and to say, hey, we're going to be leaders in this, and we're going to offer the comfort and care and support and counsel that people so desperately need, because we already know that people are more likely to go to a clergy before they go to a mental health care provider or physician and struggle with these types of problems.
Yes. And I want to touch on that too in just a minute, but your book has 4 very practical, this is such a practical guide for anyone involved in church. One of the things you just said was the pandemic gave the church an opportunity to go to where people were, which made me think of the Great Commission. Jesus said, go and make disciples, not stay home and let them come to you. It's go
Right.
and make disciples. And that first starts with meeting the basic needs. And you cover mental health in 4 areas: recognizing it, referring when there is a need, relationships involved with the healing process, and then the restoration. Isn't that what we all long for? Why, Matt, is it so hard for many church leaders to step into being willing just to listen and recognize, I may not have all the answers, but I want to understand you and know what you're struggling with so I can help? That just seems like such a basic thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex issue. I think, one of the problems is a lot of general stigma around mental health. We don't really, people don't think of it as the same as, physical health problems, when it absolutely is. I mean, it has to do with your brain, and that's an organ. In fact, I was just thinking this morning from a conversation I had yesterday, it really is a minimizing thing when we say mental health care system. I mean, if you had I know that were in an accident and you had a neck issue. I remember watching you recover from that. But we don't say the neck injury system that you went into. You went into the medical system.
Right.
And mental health is the same. It's just be part of the medical system. Why do we talk about it in a separate way? And so, I think pastors come already with this kind of just general stigma in the population. And then, I think our society has taught us in what quick fixes. I'm going to give you a quick prayer and a couple of verses to read, and then by next Thursday, everything's going to be awesome. And I think, unfortunately, that's just not life, but that's what our Western kind of Christianity has become. It can be very kind of fake face, kind of fake mask kind of stuff. We don't really want to know what's really, more than anyone, what's going on. And I think also, as I said before, I think we know what other people's experiences with mental health issues are like. Well, I was sad, so I know what depression is. And I was stressed out one day, so I know what serious anxiety. No, I don't. I mean, depression's depression, and so it's not just being sad. And so I think that is part of the problem as well. So it's minimized. And so then the pastor feels like, well, I'll just offer some comfort and care, and they'll be great. And there's nothing wrong with offering comfort and care, but you're minimizing the depth of the suffering. And I often put it in this context: if a person walked in and they had a gash in their arm and they were bleeding, and they sat down and they said, my wife and I are not getting along very well, and I'd really like to get your counsel on it. And the blood is just running out of their arm. No pastor would say, well, hey, let's talk about you and your wife. No, they say, what, you have another issue going on. Let's take care of that first, and then we'll talk about that. And those are both ministries. There's nothing wrong with that. So let's deal with the mental health problems causing the issues that come in for first.
And that really is an invitation to step into another person's soul. That's a very, very sacred place. In fact, one of the things that you write in that recognition chapter, the World Health Organization defines mental health as a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities, they can cope, with normal stresses of life, they can work productively, and are able to make a contribution in their community. Well, that starts with the mind, because our
Absolutely.
functional parts, the brain is the one, is the piece that then initiates that kind of function. And when there isn't the connection there, that my brain and my heart, they're not connecting. We would immediately go into surgery if my liver wasn't working or my kidneys weren't working. But
Right.
then there's no casserole parade if our brain isn't working. So how can we
Right.
help reduce the stigma of that so people will come and feel accepted and not rejected at the church?
Well, I think number one, we just have, pastors and lay ministers and ministry staff have to be aware that the data shows for almost 100 years that people are more likely to go to church. It doesn't matter whether you have a mental health ministry or they're coming to your church, but very few pastors ever make a referral. So you have to be aware of that. That is happening. So you're either going to step up or you're going to just keep doing what you've been doing. And then I think, secondly, you have to start a conversation within your congregation, because that's what it is. It's about starting a conversation where mental health issues and struggles become a normal part of discussion within a faith community. We've been doing that with COVID. And again, I think that's the positive mental health side of COVID, is that if people now come up to you and say, man, I've really found that I'm really down and depressed as a result of COVID, people are not stigmatizing that at this moment. In the past, if you just walk up to someone and said, I am really down, I'm really depressed, I don't know what's wrong with me, they would try to fix you. Well, now they understand. So start a conversation, have a sermon series, have a Sunday school class, have somebody come in and do a workshop. Just start the conversation within your congregation and see where that begins to go. Because I think what you'll see is it draws out people and they begin to share their pain, share their suffering. And that is going to be where ministries are built, out of the relationships that you form and then people being able to share what's been going on in their lives.
I really want to empower people through this conversation to start speaking out openly and honestly about where they have been and what has helped. I know that in the last week, I've had 2 appointments, and I don't know these people. I've never met these people. And yet both were women. And when I asked about their families, they said, well, I'm divorced. And then that opens the door for a conversation. Well, I'm sorry, what happened? And both had gone through very domestically violent relationships. Both had gone through stalking and things, and Great Depression, and had gone to the church, and no one believed them. And I look at them and say, I mean, that's a double victimization. That's added trauma to what they're
Right.
already experiencing.
Secondary traumatization. I mean,
It's
we actually called that in mental health.
it's huge. And
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
how can the church better respond when someone is in need, instead of saying, well, statistically, that doesn't make sense? Because as it is now, pastors, 60%, I think maybe a little bit more, will usually question a woman if she shows up saying, I'm in an abusive relationship and I need help, or this is going on behind closed doors. And the pastor questions it rather than saying, let me lean into that and learn more about that. Can you give words for pastors or leaders who hear someone say something that's very devastating, but very real?
Right. I think, first, to pastors, I would say, it isn't your role at that moment to try to figure out whether this is perfectly described exactly the way it happened, because that perception is that person's reality. And you have to understand that. So you need to just put that out of your mind. A person in distress, a person that says they've been abused or traumatized, has come to you, and your first response should not be, is this true? Let me figure out if she's lying. It should be compassion. It should be grace. God has put them before you, not for you to judge them, but for you to comfort them. So offer comfort in relation. You try to connect with them on the emotional level. Don't try to reason it through with them. Try to, if they're showing fear or distress or anger or whatever, connect with them on an emotional level and begin to walk them through those feelings. but also affirm them who they are in Christ, that God is present with them, that God does not want these types of things to happen to individuals, that is a result of a fallen world. None of this involves you trying to figure out whether this really happened or not. It is you ministering to the individual. You're not called to do that, okay? And so, I mean, you're not the judge in the court proceedings here. And then to those that, individuals who go, women or men who go to pastors, and they don't receive comfort, they don't receive acceptance. I mean, what I would say is a couple of things. One is that local church that you went to, that's not Jesus. Okay, so remember that. Okay, I mean, Jesus accepts you, Jesus loves you, cares for you, knows your pain and suffering, and is there to offer sustaining grace as you go through that. So it's okay for you to say, you know what, these guys don't get it, and they're not offering me what I need. So I'm going to find another local body that will. And that's perfectly fine. So hold on to Jesus and go find another congregation that can offer you support you. But again, pastors, don't try to figure it out. Just offer the comfort and care that we have in Christ. And you would do that for anyone. It's the same if the guy came in and said, I have cancer. You wouldn't try to figure out why he has cancer, how he got cancer, what kind of cancer it is. You just know the guy's got cancer, and that's stuff. It's an interesting, kind of mental game for me to even imagine. Why is that your first thought? A woman tells you she's been abused, and then you want to figure out if it's true. But if somebody comes in and says they have a physical illness, you don't go, I'm not really sure if that's true.
Yeah,
or
show
not.
me the blood test.
Yeah, can I see your medical record to make sure? Because if it's not true, I don't want to help you, which is really what you're saying. But remember, the person is in distress, and their reality is that they've been traumatized. That's all you need to know.
And also there are nonverbals to be looking out for, Matt. What kinds of nonverbal communications can pastors look for as they listen to a woman or to a man who says, violence is happening in my home and I need help? Because the body tells so much.
A lot of times with women have been traumatized, they, especially obviously by a man, they won't make eye contact. They'll speak very low. They have they have that very that kind of body, they're not using their hands to talk, and and also they tend to be, and this, a lot of times, this is why pastors might, or someone might think they're not telling the truth, perhaps. They don't give a lot of details because they're so shamed by what has occurred. They just will say, well, he's been abusing, he's been hurting me, and they won't go into a lot of detail. And just being human, we tend to, if someone gives a lot of detail and they're very forthright in their presentation, very confident, we just instantaneously believe them, whether they're telling the truth or not. And that's been demonstrated through research in court proceedings and things. But the reality is, you're not going to see that. You're not going to see a real forthright. You're going to see a broken individual who's shamed by what's happened, who questions whether they're responsible for what happened. And it's all they can do to just utter the words, I've been abused. And that should be enough. That should just be enough. Again, we're not talking about you in a court proceeding. And I think that's the problem. Because of the media and television, and this Me Too kind of movement, and every woman should be believed, and kind of, well, you have a distressed individual in front of you, and it's your opportunity to offer them care and comfort. It's not your role to be a judge and a jury. So don't go there. Okay, by comforting her and offering her compassion and care, you're not damning the man. Okay, she's what's important.
That's so good, Matt, because yes, when they have the courage to come and at least open up, that in itself is terrifying, because when she goes home, closes the door, or when he goes home, closes the door, who knows what goes on. And so it's an outcry, as they say in the rape and victimization world. It's them saying, I'm desperate for help.
And I would say one last thing for pastors. and I've seen this happen, and I'm laughing, it's so stupid. You do not pick the phone up when she leaves to call the husband to find out if this is really happening. Because if it's really happening, you just caused it to happen. So that's not your role. This is a confidential interaction. Your role is to assist her, comfort her, bring her closer to the Lord. Your role is not to try to be judge and jury, because I'm telling you right now, whether you believe her or not, you pick that phone up and call her husband, say, well, I need to talk to you about this. I want to find out what's going on. If he's abusing her, you just caused him to abuse her again.
Yep. And I will say that exact thing has happened in my own life, and it was terribly devastating. In fact, I'm reading right now Kurt Thompson's book on shame, and he says the core of shame causes judgment rather than care and comfort. We run and judge quickly when there's a sense of shame inside of someone and they don't have the space or the capacity to provide what you're saying. Basic presence, comfort, care, interest. How can I really help you today? Just being heard. Just mirror back what she says, for heaven's sakes.
Right.
Just start there.
Be
And there,
present.
exactly.
Offer some Christ-like, comfort. I mean, it's really not that hard. It's when we get into that judgment kind of, or I'm going to figure this all out kind of thing, or somehow I have to be this mediator who's going to fix all this. And, the other weird side of that is the pastor picks up the phone and calls the husband and says, well, Judy said that you've been hitting her. And he goes, no, I haven't. You believe him. Why would you not believe her? Because, again, now we can get into all kind of gender issues, and women are the weaker vessel and looked down upon. And there is a patriarchy kind of thing that goes on in the church some, but that is, we got to get beyond that. We got to get beyond that. Because, another thing COVID has given us has been a dramatic increase in domestic violence.
Yes. Yeah, it has been huge. In fact, a couple of statistics from your book that I read about homicides are actually half in number of people who are committing suicide this last year. That was a massive number, over 47,000 suicides compared to a homicide. Secondly,
and we talk about homicide constantly.
Exactly. We're hearing all about death. Suicide.
And we spend billions of dollars to stop homicides and spend very little to try to stop suicide.
So with that said on suicide, because again, I have experienced that with one of my own children years ago, being suicidal and self-harming and trying to seek help in the church, which is where most people go first because it's not expensive, because it's close, and they think this will hopefully provide the help. The whole suicide myth and fact piece, you say most people believe suicide, or those who are suicidal, are wanting attention, or they don't give any warning, or, well, they're just going to always be suicidal because they're crazy. Can you just debunk all of that for us? Because it's just so unnecessary.
Well, yeah, that first one, which is you hear all the time, which is, well, she's just trying to get attention. I could talk through that and say, hey, wouldn't there be something wrong with somebody that was trying to get attention by saying they were going to kill themselves? I mean, obviously that person is struggling, but the reality is that's just not true. I mean, that no one in mental health thinks that. I mean, you may think that, but no one in the mental health world thinks that. So if one of my clients or someone we work here at the clinic suggested that they were going to harm themselves, we would look at that as a crisis, a serious event. We would never think that they were just trying to get attention. So just because someone says that they're having suicidal thoughts, but they don't harm themselves, you have to understand that in the United States in a given year, about 12 million people will have serious suicidal thoughts. A smaller subset will make plans to harm themselves, and a smaller subset will actually make an attempt. But the majority of people that actually make an attempt made a plan, but not nearly, but lots of people have thoughts. We have to take every thought very serious, because it only takes one thought and someone not picking up on it for someone actually to die by suicide.
And another point I want to make on that whole attention thing, perhaps the fact that an individual is considering suicide, is making a plan for that, is a result of being dismissed, not being seen, not being listened to, and they're making an outcry, or just someone help me. I don't know what to do. My pain is so big that I would rather not exist. Now think about
Well, I
that.
think that, even to have that idea in your head that, well, this person's only saying this because they just want attention. I mean, how unfeeling is that?
Yeah.
I just can't even fathom that someone, now I've had clients that are suicidal regularly, and so, yeah, you get worn out. It's like, oh, here we go again. We have to go through this again. But you care for the person. You want them to be better. You want to be able to move beyond this. And to just kind of dismiss it as, it's just attention, I'll just let that go. I always say, well, what if you're wrong? What if tomorrow they die? How do you feel then? Oh, I guess it wasn't attention. Let's have a little bit more compassion. And that's something I try to say in the book is that, our first response should be one of compassion and grace, not judgment and kind of, figuring it out, kind of fix it. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of our responses, and a lot of that's just kind of taught to us by our culture, is that it's not compassion and grace. It's kind of a dog-eat-dog world, and everybody kind of figure it out, the survival of the fittest kind of thing. And that's just not what the Bible calls us to be as a body. And it should be compassion and grace. It's supposed to be pouring ourselves out for one another. I mean, Jesus literally says, they will know you are my followers by the way you love one another. And we don't love one another very well. I mean, a lot of times you see, the church is in a great conflict with the culture, but it's easy for them to take shots at us because we don't even get along with one another.
That just really hits home, Matt, when you say just love one another, because that is, in fact, it was the Pharisees. Jesus came and interrupted the whole peace of Rome, peace meaning a sense of peace and contentment. That was what the Pharisees believed they had by following all these rules, by staying in charge, that authoritative stance. Well, if you don't do all these things, and Jesus is loving on the people on the Sabbath and healing them, saying, I'm meeting this need, and you guys are over there keeping the rules. I would like to ask pastors and leaders and church attenders, people who are Christians in this world, what is the first response? Is it to judge? Is it to ask questions or to seek for validating what they've said? Or is it to say, I'm going to really care for you and what you need in this moment, and then we'll move forward. In fact, I love that you include the DSM-5 has over 100, I think it was 152 different diagnoses for mental illnesses that happen from adolescent and on. And you include all those, you give descriptions for them, questions to ask, tests that can be given that don't cost a thing. It's all in the book. I'm just pitching a huge advertisement because it's not hard. You don't have to have the answers. It's, let me ask some questions. In fact, the late Stephen Covey, seek first to understand, and then be understood. If we practice that, I don't think a church would ever be empty. Can you speak into those who have completely walked away from church because of the pain they experienced from a bad experience? Because for a while, I didn't go to church, but I've worked with the pain and continue to, because community is where we heal. So can you offer words to those who are in so much sorrow because they have been judged, they have been put down, they have been disgraced, re-victimized?
Well, I mean, again, like I said before, I would say, that should have never happened. That's not what God has called us. That's not the body of Christ. And so the first step back, in a sense, is to hold on to Jesus. I mean, get yourself back into the Word, begin to pray again, begin to reconnect yourself with Christ. And obviously, I'm talking about a person who's a believer. I mean, the Holy Spirit literally indwells you. So God has never left you. They're with you. And they're closer to you than they've ever been. And all you have to do is just turn back to Him. And now, begin to work on that relationship first, build the strength in that relationship. Read the word, pray, worship privately yourself. And then as you feel comfortable, begin to then seek out a fellowship that will support you. And that's important. You don't want to go somewhere where you have to be quiet about what's wrong with you. I've had people, I remember a woman coming up to me at a church that I spoke at that said, I've been in this church for 20 years and I've never told anyone I have bipolar disorder. Well, that's a problem. Okay. I mean, because she didn't feel they would accept her, and they probably wouldn't have and that's a problem. So begin to reach out. I actually think in a weird way, the COVID gives us another opportunity here, and that is you can connect with a lot of congregations virtually. So begin to connect, begin to, in a sense, kind of connect with the fellowship of one another, fellowshipping in worship. And then, you might want to set up an appointment with one of the pastors, particularly the pastor of pastoral care, and just share with what has happened to you in the past as far as how you have been hurt because of what you struggle with, the trauma or whatever, and see what that person's response is. If that person's response is grace and compassion, well, then you're one step closer to being back in part of if that person isn't, you've only shared with one person, and that's just a person, and people make mistakes. You move on to another fellowship. And I hate to say that I have to put it back on you to do that. The church should be reaching out to you. But unfortunately, people are people. But Jesus is God. And so that doesn't change. So fellowships, one may be better than another, just like one mechanic might be better than another. But the thing is that God does not change, and God is with you and cares for you and will sustain you through this if you continue to reach out to him, and it will be that sustaining force. But again, just very slowly walk yourself back in. We don't want, no one wants to be a constant victim. And there are churches, I list some churches on the back of the book that I wrote there on that are doing a great job.
Yes.
And another thing, what I would say is, ministries, like if you're in an area where, if you're in the Houston area, Hope and Healing Center, you can call here. We can give you recommendations of churches in the Houston area, or a ministry in your area that is sympathetic. Ask them for recommendations of churches that are supportive of people that struggle with trauma and mental health problems.
So those are some very practical things. I want you to continue on that. When people are looking for a safe church, what qualities should they be looking for?
Well, I think number one, I think that the clergy or the ministry staff, they should be very accessible. I don't necessarily mean that, if you're in a church of 5,000 people, everybody can go see the senior pastor. But if you need to talk to somebody, you should be able to see the clergy of that church. And you shouldn't just be passed off down to, well, you got to go see Johnny, he's the volunteer that does. I mean, you should be able to interact with people. I think, secondly, I think the church itself should be a church of acceptance, and it should be friendly and compassionate. I mean, how were you treated the first time you showed up before anybody knew who you were? What are the sermons like? Are the sermons about, are they focused on Jesus, on the changing, transformative power of Jesus? And is that what's continually going on? Or is it a bunch of like, here's the 5 steps to make your life perfect. Here's the 6 things to do to make, the perfect marriage. Because you know what? That's not going to work. That's just going to frustrate the heck out of you. But if they're about, transformation through the power of Jesus, then that's a different thing. And then what are the staff like? Are they vulnerable? Are they transparent? Does the pastor share personal stories of problems in his life or suffering, as opposed to, let me tell you about how I did it with my kids because they're perfect. Let me tell you about my marriage. It's awesome. And I have my oldest son in some churches that we've been to in the past. He's like a radar for that. If it's one thing to say, my wife and I, our oldest son was, this is what we did. It's a real struggle to be a parent, but it worked out. And these are some things that we'd recommend. And they give some of the good and the bad and how it's a different thing to basically say, be like me, have great kids, if you just do what I do. And that, that's you don't want to be in that kind of church. So again, are they accessible? Is it Christ-centered? A progressive transformation, sanctification through a lifetime that God is present with you and caring for you and changing you. And is the church a place where people are transparent and accepting? And you do hear about problems. I think that's one of the biggest things. You may have gone to a church for 20 years and never heard anybody ever say anything about a problem.
I don't want to go to that church
That's
because I can't fit there.
That is a problem.
Exactly.
I mean, if you just look at Paul's letters. I mean, the New Testament. I also often hear people say, "I want to be in a New Testament church." Well, a New Testament church is a disaster. It's a wonderful disaster. I mean, there are people having literally every sin that you would never want to be involved in. They're involved in that, and they're falling back into that, and they are struggling to maintain a focus on Jesus. And people are coming in with false teachings, and they're falling back into sin. That's what a church is like. But the leadership of that church, just like Paul does in his letters, takes the time to refocus the congregation back on why we are here. We're here because Jesus has transformed us in the Spirit. He has sacrificed himself for us and made us a new creation. And we don't have to be like that anymore. We are on a path to Christ likeness. And that's what you should be hearing. That's going to be a supported church.
What I love about mentioning Paul is the fact that Romans 7, he completely opens his heart up and says, hey, listen, why is it that I keep going back to this sin that I don't want to do? It's got me held captive. And yet Romans 8, there is therefore no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And then he ends that passage with, there's nothing that can separate us from the love of God, not height, depth. Nothing will separate you from the love of God.
Not trauma, not mental illness. Nothing.
Right. And Rick and Kay Warren have done such a great job, sadly, after the tragic loss of their son. I think it's really important, Matt, for you to speak to those who have lost a loved one to suicide, and the church says, well, they're damned to hell. Oh, that's going to help. I just don't.
And that does happen. I mean, there was a time, particularly, in the Catholic Church, where it was taught to be a mortal sin, and that was it. It was unforgivable. I mean, first, I think, obviously, it's an overwhelming moment when somebody dies as a result of suicide. I think there's some things we have to understand. Number one, a person does not make a decision to take their own life with a reasoned mind. Okay, so more than 90% of people that die by suicide are struggling with a mental health problem at the time of their death. And you may or may not know that they're struggling with that, but they've done research where they go back and they do a psychological autopsy on the individual, where you interview other people and workers, and ultimately it's found that over 90% of people literally were struggling with mental health problems at the time. So suicide is the terminal end of a mental health problem. Okay, so they died as a result of, I know that Peter Kramer, who's the guy who wrote Prozac Nation, he has this great quote where he says, suicide is what they put on your death certificate when you die from depression. And so, that's, I actually prefer to say, like, if somebody had bipolar disorder and then they take their life, I don't say they died by suicide. I say they died from bipolar disorder, because that's exactly what happened. And so I think we have to understand that when that person took their life, they really believed at that moment that was the right thing to do. It would separate them from the pain. It might be better for others because they wouldn't have to care for them anymore. They were wrong, but they did that. Okay, so that's one thing. So we can, and the second thing is we have to remove the guilt from the family. That it's not your fault. You didn't miss something, and you could have saved them. Professionals have their clients die by suicide. Professionals. I've had people that have died by suicide. I've had people that made suicide attempts, and at the moment they did it, I would have never thought they were going to do it. It happens. Okay, so it's not perfectly predictable. You can let go of that guilt. And so, I think the another thing that we have to understand is that, God does not send people to hell. We are already on our way to hell. Okay. And so, and we were born on our way to hell. Hell is separation from God, eternal separation from God, because we are sinful. Okay. And so when we come to a saving faith in Jesus Christ, we are now on the path of life. We are in the kingdom of light. We are new creations. We are children of God. And nothing, as you just said, will take that away from us. And so do we continue to sin? Sure, we continue to sin. We're being progressively transformed. We've been spiritually transformed in a moment, but our bodies, our minds are being changed over time in sanctification. And we won't know what we ultimately will be until we see him. And when we see him, we will be like him. That's what the scriptures tell us. And so we have to understand that. Let's just say suicide is a sin, because you know what? It probably is. Most of everything else we do is a sin, because we are sinful by nature when we're born, okay? And so a single sin does not send you to hell. Not being in a saving relationship with Jesus Christ is what separates a person from, it keeps them separated from God forever. So if a person knows Christ and they take their life, they're ushered into the presence of God. That because, and what if, moments before my death, I cursed at somebody? That's a sin.
Right.
I mean, what if moments before my death, I lusted for somebody, or I mean, who knows? I mean, you name a sin. I was prideful. We don't then say, "Oh, I'm sorry," right before.
Whoops for you.
That's wrong theology. That's
Right.
that minimizes the sacrifice and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Right.
It says that it's not sufficient to deal with my sin or that person's sin, and it is fully sufficient. So let's make sure that we have our theology right. Okay, so understand that suicide occurs as a result of mental health problems. The person, so in my opinion, God would even hold them culpable because they're not in their right mind. Number two, but that's just my own personal opinion. Number two, there is no guilt for the survivor. I mean, I know they will feel guilty, but it's not your fault that this happened. This happened as a result of a mental health problem. And number three, it's all about a saving faith with Jesus. It's not about, did you commit a sin?
In fact, I almost want to say, well, I will say, that judgment from the person who is still alive, that's a sin. I mean, judging
Absolutely.
someone for a choice they made is saying that I know better than God what they should have done. Well, I'm sorry, that I don't find that theologically correct in scripture.
And the Jewish faith, for a long time, people that die by suicide, they wouldn't perform burial rites or allow them to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. But even that changed over time, because we began to understand how mental illness is involved. So if an individual dies by suicide, the Jewish rabbi always looks at that and says, okay, well, we can see right here this person was struggling with mental health problems, but they're not culpable for that. So they can have, same thing in Catholicism. Catholicism no longer teaches that is a mortal sin, that you go to hell and you can't be forgiven, because they recognize the mental health component of it, and the person isn't culpable. They say the person's not culpable. Now, again, I'll let God figure that out, because thanks be to Jesus, I am a new creation, and he saved me, because in and of myself, I was on a path to eternal damnation, and there's nothing I could do about that. And there was no way I could save myself, and he saved me. So I don't, we just, again, it's back to, you literally have a family that is in distress.
Yes.
And what comes out of your mouth is, I'm sorry to tell you that your loved one is in hell. You have disqualified yourself, in my opinion, to be a leader in the church.
Thank you. I agree with that completely. That is just,
I mean, whether you believe that or not, that's not even the issue. It's not that you believe that. It's that you would say that, because that changes nothing.
right.
You need the compassion and comfort and care of Christ is what these people need.
Right.
And you can give that even if you believe that that's what happened. I don't think that's what happened. I don't agree with that at all. I think that's theologically incorrect. But if you would say that out loud to a person in that moment, because I'll tell you what, there's no way in the world that Jesus would have said that. There is no way that that didn't come from the Spirit.
Yeah. And I think it is very important for people to separate that when they have been hurt in a church, that is a church or that is an individual in a church, but that's not Jesus. That's
Right,
not who he
absolutely.
is in the Gospels. Just go to the Gospels and see how he cared for people, how he went to them, how he listened, and then even would say, do you believe that I can make him well? They just believed. He said, your faith has allowed this healing to occur.
And I
So
would also say, if someone says something to you at a church, I mean, I've had that happen. I had a client that a Bible study leader told him to stop taking his psych medicine. And he's a very suicidal individual because God wanted to heal him. Okay. Well, if you just take that as that being what the church said, and so, he took it that way. And he actually was thinking about stopping it. Well, I happen to know the pastor of that church. So I called the pastor. I said, this is happening and you need to do something about it. He said, I want to assure you, we do not teach that. We do not believe that. He called the Bible study leader, removed him as a leader. He then met with the gentleman that was my client and told him, this is not what we teach. This is not what we believe. And so, I know it's very painful when you hear something like that, but it's also very possible that the person that said that, I mean, if it's the senior pastor, it's time to move on.
yes.
Okay? But it's very possible that if that person said something that's inconsistent with the church, and the church may want to know that that was said. So, I mean, if you still have it in you, you have the ability. I'm not telling you need to do this, but if you have it in you, or you perhaps have a friend that would go along with you or go for you, I think it would be worth having a conversation with the senior pastor and say, this was said to me.
Yes.
Is this what the church believes and teaches? Because you may find that actually that may draw compassion out of the church. They may find out that they have somebody that's gone rogue on them and is hurting people. And you may, in a sense, do a very good service to the church by helping them kind of right that wrong.
Which going back,
if you feel you can do it. It may be very.
yes, and going back to what to look for, you just talked about authenticity, humility, honesty, vulnerability. Those are all pieces of the character you want to see in a leader who will take time to listen, who will say, I am terribly sorry that happened, and I will walk with you through the healing process, whatever that looks like, or we have a healing process that we want to engage you with. And
Absolutely.
then, like you said, it's an opportunity for everybody to learn. Matt, I'm going to shift a little bit here because I am a caregiver, and you talk a lot about caregivers and caregivers caring for those with mental health issues. It is exhausting. You say 8.4 million people in the US provide some level of care for an adult living with a mental disorder. And what they deal with is argumentativeness, oftentimes withdrawal, isolation, a lack of communication, outbursts of anger, refusal for treatment, threat and harm to themselves and others, verbal abuse. They're always on call. That is so true. And the compromises that happen when there is a mental illness in the family, siblings will struggle. The marriages have a higher divorce rate. Can you speak into the caregiver heart? Because a lot of times with caregiving is the mental health challenge of anxiety and depression. What is going to happen to my loved one if I pass? What is going to happen if my loved one has an outburst of anger and goes and wants to threaten people? It's a family systems issue. It's not just that one person caring for someone. So how can we find God to be real? Because sometimes he feels really quiet and silent when we call out for him. That's a hard place to be.
No, absolutely. And I think, a lot of times our treatment approaches or the way we talk about mental health issues, they're really just about the individual that has the issue. And the thought is somehow we can just fix them. But the reality is that, these are chronic conditions and a lot of people have to be cared for at some level, as you said. So as you said, it's a family systems issue. It's a whole family. This is the easiest part for the church because I've had a lot of pastors tell me, I won't say they're doing a good job, but it's the easiest part. The lot of pastors say, well, I don't know anything about mental illness. I don't really know that I can do anything. Well, you know what? You certainly can support the family. Okay. You certainly can help them from a spiritual perspective, even from a, kind of a benevolence fund, physical issues, things like that. So, families struggle. And, again, first they deal with a lot of guilt. I've got to fix this. This is somehow my fault. I've got to fix this in my adult child or my adolescent. I need to, and then there's shame. I can't let other people know about this. So we got to keep it quiet. And then that is this vicious cycle, because when you keep it quiet, then you deal with it only on your own. So you have no one you can talk to. You wear yourself out. It causes your own mental health problems. And so what you have to do is you, as a caregiver, is you have to take care of yourself, or you cannot care for someone else. If you burn out, so if you've ever had this thought, what is going to happen to my loved one, my adult child with mental illness, when I die? If you've had that thought, have this thought: what is going to happen to my adult child if I completely emotionally collapse and I can't care for them anymore?
Right, that's a hard balance. That is hard.
Absolutely. And so you have to say to yourself, if I care for myself, I'm caring for them, because more often than not, it's put on the back of one individual. And so how do I care for myself? Well, I care for myself for taking time for myself. I have to have a break. I have to have a respite from my person I care for, or I'm going to begin to hate them and resent them. Yeah. Okay. And you don't want to hate or resent your loved one. Okay. It's not their fault that they're ill, but it becomes very frustrating, because all those things you just listed that I put in there, oftentimes it's as if they're fighting you when you're trying to care for them. And so you're not getting a lot of, thanks, Mom, for spending your whole life taking care of me.
I don't recall that happening.
I'm not taking that medicine again. I'm not going to the doctor again. Stop telling me I'm not doing. And so you have to take time. So find an opportunity for respite. A great way to do that is be connected with a faith community, where a faith community someone can come and sit with your child. And someone might be able to go and take you, or your adult that you're caring for. Someone could perhaps take you to get coffee, or go with you to go shopping, just to have a conversation. It's important for you to have those opportunities. Get yourself in a support group. There's lots. We have here at the Hope and Healing Center all kind of caregiver groups. There's all kind of caregiver groups out there. Get in a support group where you have other caregivers that can talk to you about what they've experienced. You can talk about your experience. You can minister to one another. Make sure you're dealing with your own spiritual life. One of the things that we found in research that we've done is that when you have a mental health problem in the family, it disrupts the family's ability to practice their faith. And usually what will happen is one member of that family that is doing most of the caregiving, they don't even go to church. They're the ones who take care of the individual while everyone else goes to church.
Right.
And ultimately, most people stop going to church. So work out a system where you're actually able to worship, to get time away, to get time to be able to spend with God. You have to do this. And if you need professional counseling, get professional counseling. It's not ever a bad idea for you to go to a counselor, to have someone, a third party, to talk this stuff through with. So, a circle of friends is great, but sometimes a professional counselor. So take care of yourself. And then the obvious, exercise, be healthy, don't adopt negative coping strategies like overeating or alcohol, things like that. Because if you're unhealthy, physically or mentally, you simply will not be able to take care of your loved one, and they will be unhealthy physically.
Well, one of the things Reframing has done is we have an online private caregiver support group. And Matt, it is one of the most refreshing, delightful spaces that I'm so honored to be a part of, because we're very honest with, this is super hard. I don't know what to do. And people aren't saying, well, why are you wrestling with that in judgment? They say, oh, I'm so sorry you're hurting. I will see if I can find some support for that. I may not have the answers, but I'm hearing you and I'm stepping into your world because I understand the struggle that you're going through. I remember hearing the story from my dad, Matt, it's just almost crushing, because back in the day, in the 50s and 60s, when psychology and psychiatry was emerging, and my mom was struggling with her mental health, which I write about in the foreword to Steve Gersovich's book that you have as a reference, by the way. I love that guy. But he could tell no one, Matt. And my mom had had a baby, 6 weeks old. My older brother is 18 months older than that. And my dad has a wife who's struggling mentally and has no one to talk to. And he said, Colleen, I remember just one night, it was so awful. I ran down the back alley. It's hard for me to say this, but he talks about running down the back alley because there was no one to say, Chuck, it's going to be okay. How many people are running down their back alleys because they have no one to go to? And
I would say that's a great metric, what you just gave there. So someone might be saying out there, well, I don't know if I'm unhealthy. You know, I mean, maybe I think everything's going all right. If you go through a week and you do not have a conversation with another adult about something other than your child or whoever it is you're caring for or the illness that they have, you need to change that because you are in an unhealthy situation. You must have opportunities to have your own life. Just because your loved one is ill does not mean your life stops. So if your life is stopped because all you do is care for them, then you are vulnerable and they are vulnerable.
yes.
And your father, unfortunately, is even in a greater difficult arena because we hold pastors to an impossible standard. And this is again where we've seen an uptick in suicides in pastors.
Yeah.
I mean, over the last few years, we've even seen that even more and more, even more prominent pastors, because we don't allow. So again, you need to find a church where a pastor is open and transparent and vulnerable, because if they're not, it's either because they don't want to be, or the church doesn't allow them to be. And if they can't be vulnerable, then you certainly won't be able to be vulnerable either. And so, that experience your father's gone through, fortunately, is very common. I've talked to more than one pastor who lost their job because they told the elder board or congregation that they were going to see a counselor or needed to take psychiatric medication, or they had a loved one, like a daughter or a wife that was going to get mental health treatment, and that was the end of their job.
That is so tragic. But then again, that also says, go ahead and be free to seek healing and become more healthy, because that is a toxic environment. I know Daniel Stigall has done so much work on interpersonal neurobiology, which is kind of my nerdy place to go. But the fact that when we are hurt and stay in isolation, our brains cannot process getting well until we are with other people who provide that kind of care, who will say, I'm going to walk with you through this. You can say what's on your heart, and I'm not going to judge you. I'm going to love you. I'm not saying that we accept and invite sin. I'm saying we walk with them through like Jesus did. We wash their feet. We clean their house. We help them find whatever needs that they have. And then in meeting those needs, I do this because Jesus did that for me. He's forgiven me, and I walk with him, and that's my lifeline.
And you can't find an example in the scripture of a hurting person that came to Jesus that he rejected or told them to go away. He receives them right where they are. So how could all these things we've been talking about, how could anyone say or do those things if they are professing to be a believer in Christ, or even beyond that, a leader in the church or a minister of the gospel? Because that's not at all what Jesus would do. We're not talking about sin here. We're talking about pain and suffering and stress. I'm not saying someone came to you and said, hey, guess what? I just cheated on my wife. And you go, oh, that's great. I mean,
right. Hope you feel better.
About someone coming to you going, I'm dying inside. I'm falling apart, and I need you to help me. And you go, well, I'm not sure that's true, or if you'd just done this, it wouldn't have happened. And I mean, again, that's just not what we see in the scripture. We can do better.
Yes. And I love that your book is not only very practical, hands-on, gives information across the board for how churches can step up, but it's also very, it's grace. It's let's deal with the madness or the mental challenges with grace, just as we would deal with someone who's crushed their legs in a car accident, or who's just had a child with disabilities and doesn't even know where to go, I can't answer all their whys, but I can answer who and point them to the Lord and be with them and companion with them. One of the things that the Hope and Healing Center does so well, and you talk about this in your book, is offer words of hope. So as we wrap up, there's so many more things I could talk to you about, Matt, but time is limited. And as we wrap this up, I want to ask you, what words of hope and help and healing can you give those who may be caregivers, or those who are contemplating suicide or self-harming, or those who cannot seem to find God in the darkness of where they are today?
Well, I would say that, more often than not, we're kind of taught that hope is a feeling. It's kind of really, it's more wishful thinking. I hope things will get better. That's wishful thinking. That is, and that's not how the scriptures define hope. For the Christian, hope is literally, as Paul says, Christ in you, the hope of glory, or the accepting as fact the things that we cannot see, that we are children of God, that God cares for us, loves us, that we are fully redeemed. And so to the Christian, hope is a person, an unchanging God, Jesus Christ. And that's where we have to find our hope. So what I would say is this: for the person who is caregiving or has a mental health problem, is wondering, I'm losing my hope. Stop trying to look at hope as a feeling and recognize that Christianity, Jesus Christ, offers a hope that transcends circumstances, an unchanging hope that you can hold on to. It doesn't mean that the circumstances change immediately because you come to a faith in Christ, but it gives you a foundation from where you can begin to move forward and recover. It says, I know that I'm solid here. I'm anchored on this foundation, and this will not change. He will not leave me no matter how bad things get, and I can move forward from that. And then begin to take advantage of the body. That's why God has put us together, because we desperately need, as you said, to be in relationship with one another. And we are in relationship spiritually, and we also need to be in relationship temporally. And so, to those out there who aren't struggling with a problem, reach out to those who are, because their problem is our problem. They are part of the body. If the eye is affected, it hurts the whole body. The whole body suffers. And so if they're suffering, we are suffering as a body. And so ground your hope in Jesus, because he is our hope, and search out those that can walk along you and really be his hands and feet in a very physical way, as we all journey on this, because this is all of our issues. This isn't just your issue.
Matt, thank you so much for writing this book, and thank you for those words that are so true. It's interesting. You noted that many seminaries don't have a class on mental health, and yet there's so much integration with the mind and the soul. In fact, that is integration, to be one, put together. Just thank you for the work that you're doing. How can people connect with the Hope and Healing Center, find a counselor online if they need that? How can they get a hold of you?
If you go to just hopeandhealingcenter.org, that's our main website. But if you or your church are interested in the training that we do for churches, or you're looking for resources in relationship to mental health, you're trying to learn about mental health, we've set up a website just for that, just for faith communities, but also for schools as well. We do training in schools, and that's just mentalhealthgateway.org, mentalhealthgateway.org. And all the training's there. It's all online. It's all free. It's also available in Spanish. All our support group materials in English and Spanish. It's all free as well. So, we have some collaborative trainings with the American Association of Christian Counselors and mental health coaches. There's all kinds of levels of training, and there's also just resources if you want to learn about depression or whatever. So it's just a great place to go if you're just interested or if you're struggling.
That's just incredible. Matt, thank you for your time. Thank you for doing this amazing work. And thank you for reaching out, being the hands and feet of Jesus, literally, and offering that anchor that will help people move forward with greater fulfillment in life, regardless of what comes at them. You're just doing a great job, and I so appreciate this time.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
All right, I'll have everything in the show notes as well. So thank you, Matt.